Cinematic universes is a concept that is slowly starting to die down as of late. I know it's hard to believe as everybody tried creating their own cinematic universe at some point, but with the exception of Marvel, who kicked this trend up into high gear, cinematic universes are slowly disappearing from the world. Marvel's comic book competition, DC Comics, gives the impression that they are sweeping their cinematic universe under the rug. I guess I don't think even they know what they're doing with it. Universal's Dark Universe didn't even get started, as its first outing was a critical and financial bomb. Other attempts to expand on existing franchises like Disney and Universal are doing with Star Wars and Fast and Furious respectively, those are still around, but they rely more on brand recognition than the fact that they are a shared universe. Say whatever you will about the MCU, it's the only universe which seems to have gotten it right on the head. Most of its entries are critically acclaimed, they're making a bunch of green at the box office, and people are still looking forward to seeing the upcoming adventures of these now big-named superheroes, myself included. But there's one cinematic universe which people tend to miss. One that isn't very long, consisting of only 4 movies at the time of this video, and among all the other universes, good or bad, is mostly glazed upon. I'm talking about no other than Warner Brothers and Legendary's MonsterVerse. In my opinion, this is the only cinematic universe outside of Marvel's that did it right. And it's honestly disheartening to see so many people just ignore it for the most part. It's not perfect by any means, but I honestly think this is the best example out of all the attempts to get a cinematic universe going. I am very much aware that this is a big claim, so let's see if I can make my point clear as to why the MonsterVerse was the most successful attempt at creating a cinematic universe. But in order for me to do that, we need to start at the beginning. In 1933, the now classic King Kong was released in theaters, and it took the world by a storm with its revolutionary special effects for the time and the timeless story of Beauty and Beast. King Kong was a massive success and can often be seen as the start of the giant monster movies, at least in Hollywood. Following the success of King Kong, several other movies attempted the idea of having a giant monster going around destroying a city, but it is none other than Toho's Godzilla from 1954 that's often seen as the first actual kaiju, giant monster in Japanese, to grace the screen and kick up the whole genre. Ever since then, it kept growing and growing as the monsters that started in it, and the Japanese market kept it going strong for over 60 years with many more giant monsters created. In 2014, Legendary Pictures stomped into theaters with their American take on Godzilla. People say that there was an American version in the 90s, but they're actually factually wrong. This American Godzilla was a hit, and it inspired Legendary to kick off their own cinematic universe focused on giant monsters fighting each other. And now here we are 7 years later with the maybe end of their plans. While future plans for the cinematic universe are unknown at the time, I wanted to talk to all the 2 people who might be seeing this about why I love this universe so much and why I think it's one of the best examples of how to do this kind of universe right. And I think the main reason I should start with is, ironically enough, is that they never tried making a cinematic universe to begin with. We of course know now to look at Godzilla 2014 as the start of this universe and the launching point for all things to come, but the movie itself is pretty self-contained. Scientists discover a breed of monsters named Mutos that are looking for each other in order to mate and spread their kind around the world. The army tries to stop them, but the Muto's real enemy is none other than Godzilla, a prehistoric alpha predator who wants to preserve nature by beating said Mutos. He does just that and gets back to the ocean. The story was done. It had a beginning, middle, and an end. When I first saw this movie, I didn't even think about where things could go. I just figured that, yeah, the story was done. No further developments needed. Sure enough, a sequel to Godzilla 2014 was announced after the success of the first outing, but we wouldn't receive Godzilla's second American adventure until 5 years later. To hold us over though, we got a different movie which was confirmed to take place in the same universe, Kong Skull Island. a new take on the classic King Kong story. Taking place centuries before Godzilla 2014, this movie didn't really have any direct ties to it, with the exception of the organization known as Monarch, who would send a research team to Skull Island in order to explore it. There they find a bunch of bizarre creatures, and on top of them all is Kong, who is the supposed alpha of this island. Once again, this movie was very self-contained, with the exception of Monarch connecting it to Godzilla 2014. Nothing about this movie felt like it's trying to build up a connection. People went to the island, exploded, got out and went home, no loose ends present. I am aware of the post-credit scene teasing us with the fact that Godzilla does exist in this universe and setting up the eventual battle, but its positioning after the credits also disconnects it from the rest of the movie and makes it more of a tease, an idea which is supposed to hype you up for what's coming next, but could also be completely ignored if this universe has never actually gone anywhere after Kong Skull Island. But luckily, it did go somewhere. In 2019, the American Godzilla returned to the big screen with Godzilla, King of the Monsters, a standalone sequel which featured a lot more classic monsters from Toho's Godzilla movies, and challenged Godzilla to hold on to his title of the rightful King of the Monsters. This movie didn't do as well as the other two in terms of critical reception and box office performance, but luckily we didn't stop there, as the next part of the franchise was already well underway, and was also teased in the credits of King of the Monsters. Just recently we have received the supposed conclusion to this universe, Godzilla vs. Kong, which, as I'm writing this script, is the highest grossing movie released during the pandemic, and it appears to be a proper conclusion to this saga. And that right there is what I want to talk to you about. A conclusion, an end to the story. This cinematic universe had a plan behind it. They didn't try and copy what Marvel was doing or shove in references for the sake of pandering to the audience. They just told their story and that was it. No need to rebrand anything or release longer versions in order to make any of the movies passable. And they didn't chicken out once people didn't show much interest. There was a plan here, an ambition. People who actually wanted to tell new stories with these two classic characters. But okay, George Lucas had a plan for the Star Wars prequels, it didn't automatically make them great. Well, in order to fully explain my point, I'm gonna have to compare the MonsterVerse to a cinematic universe that, in my opinion, failed entirely. That universe would be the DCEU. Since both universes are Warner Bros. Properties, I think they would make a good comparison. With that being said, Man of Steel and Godzilla 2014 are pretty similar movies in terms of what they're trying to do. Both are reboots of well-known pop cultural icons which have a beginning, middle, and an end to them. Despite both kickstarting their own respective cinematic universe, they're perfectly confined and have one story to tell in order to keep things simple. Not a bad start so far for both sides. Batman v Superman is a sequel to Man of Steel, an introduction to a new cinematic version of Batman, a setup for Wonder Woman, a teaser for Justice League, and a bunch of other things which won't be explained until future movies in the franchise. Each one of the above mentioned things could have been a movie on its own, so imagine how all of them combined into a messy 2 hours long package turned out. If you answered not great, guess what? You are correct! Kong Skull Island did what it had to do, set up this new version of King Kong, and only slightly tease us that Godzilla lives somewhere in this same universe. Batman v Superman tried doing too much that in the process it forgot to tell its own story and be a movie, not a part of a franchise. While you can also point fingers that some MCU movies did this too, these were movies which came out later into that franchise's life cycle, not the second movie. And if someone is going to bring up the Ultimate Edition of Batman v Superman, if a movie needs a longer home media release in order to function as a movie, then I'm sorry, no! The theatrical version, which people needed to pay money to see, should have functioned as a movie to begin with. And on that note, neither Kong Skull Island or Godzilla 2014 needed an extended home release in order to function, so there are zero excuses. Moving on to the third entries in each universe, the MonsterVerse gave us Godzilla, King of the Monsters, while the DCEU gave us Suicide Squad. Yeah, this is going to be an easy comparison. I should start by saying that despite some minimal ties to its two predecessors, Suicide Squad does stand on its own without feeling like it's advertising 5 other movies. Yeah, we get some cameos from Batman and Superman's death is mentioned, but they serve nothing more than basic exposition and the movie itself keeps the focus on the titular theme. While that sounds well and good, it is also too little and too late. You see, at this point the DCEU made it clear that we're heading towards the Justice League. If Batman v Superman stopping itself in order to make the fact clear for you wasn't enough, it was also teased in the goddamn title. So at this point, why bother telling us about these characters who serve no purpose in Justice League? To bring King of the Monsters into this comparison, yeah, we get Rodan, Mothra and Ghidorah, who won't come back for Godzilla and Kong's epic clash, but they all tie to Godzilla's central story of maintaining his role as the one true King of the Monsters, which would lead to him fighting Kong. Suicide Squad is basically a version of King of the Monsters where the main characters would have been Ghidorah or Rodan, with Godzilla making cameos. But neither of them would have been back for the next movie, which this entire universe was building up toward. Ironically, it's the fourth film in the DCEU, Wonder Woman, that did exactly what it needed to do, setting up a character we got a glimpse of previously in preparation for the big team-up, while still keeping the story contained and functioning on its own. Godzilla King of the Monsters did just the same, despite being a sequel to 2014. It focused on Godzilla again, yes, but most of the human characters were different and the plot is still simple to understand and follow without having to see 2014 in order to get it. There are more monsters like Godzilla out there and it's up for the fire-breathing lizard to prove to everyone that he is indeed the king. This leads us to the big comparison, Godzilla vs Kong and Justice League. The moments we've been building up towards. I should mention that like Batman v Superman, I'm focusing on the theatrical release of Justice League and not the Snyder Cut. Same point I brought up regarding the Ultimate Edition of Batman v Superman applies, but it's also been confirmed that the Snyder Cut isn't canon to the rest of the DCEU, while the theatrical version is. Therefore, I'm focusing on what counts according to the people in charge. With that said, I'll keep it short. Godzilla vs Kong delivers exactly on what it promises. You get Godzilla and Kong fighting each other in glorious fight scenes, each one of them getting multiple chances to shine, so that both sides are satisfied. And despite there being a clear winner, there's also a compromise between the two kings and an understanding that they'll need each other to exist and that they're better as acquaintances than enemies. Despite being a fourth entry, it stands well enough on its own while also concluding both Kong and Godzilla's stories, and serving as an end to the saga. You could make the argument that Kong's plot was a bit more detailed than Godzilla's, but that is a good balance considering Godzilla had 2 movies to his name while Kong only had 1. Justice League, to its credit, does stand on its own despite being the 5th entry in this convoluted series. At least in terms of you don't need to watch the previous movies in order to understand what's going on. Then again, this praise is also a flaw since most of this movie serves as nothing more than explaining to you things which were never established before. We know Batman and Wonder Woman, we know Superman died, and that's it. This movie needs to explain Aquaman, Flash, and Cyborg's backstories, tell us who the hell Steppenwolf is, and have a story naturally progress. Well, the story is a rushed mess which doesn't actually end anything, the villain is the worst thing ever and isn't at least a tiny bit threatening, and all of the heroes we're supposed to get to know are lame, boring, and none of them gets a chance to shine. Remember how I said Godzilla vs Kong got both monsters a chance to shine? Well, the Justice League sure as hell don't get that chance since Superman beats them all up, and then he has to save them from this Skyrim version of Oedipus. To sum this up, the MonsterVerse knew exactly what it wanted to be and what to do with itself. It didn't try to catch up to Marvel or blow its load all at once. It did what was right for its versions of the characters and the story it was telling. And yet, I don't think it got the attention it needed from either critics or audiences. While none of these movies are perfect, I stand by my opinion that they're what future cinematic universes should follow instead of avoid. They had a plan, a story to tell, and they did it with only 2 starring monsters and 4 movies. It sometimes pains me that the DCEU gets praised for all of its flaws, with people petitioning for Zack Snyder to finish his own version of Justice League despite the fact his previous 2 entries were mediocre at best. And yet people shit all over this universe because it doesn't have enough monsters, or too much monsters, or that it's not realistic. The first complaint I could get, but the other two? What kind of movies were you expecting to see here, exactly? While it's uncertain of what the future of the MonsterVerse holds, a hashtag demanding to continue had started trending online, and it honestly makes me happy that I'm not the only one who recognizes the effort and love put into these movies. Whether or not it keeps going is another story, but I can certainly say that I enjoyed my time with the MonsterVerse, and I will continue defending it whenever the topic of cinematic universes is brought up. Time to sign off and bring back the MonsterVerse.